that's all. Before that, no play. Come join Greg and Richard right here on Dark and Red.
Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, Spurs pop up and trigger a secret release clause in your star player's contract, and in the blink of an eye, he's heading to London for the quickest medical you've ever known. Life moves pretty fast. Yeah, especially when you're still getting over Elanga to Newcastle. The Sharks are definitely circling. Here with Richard and I to react to the shock news of Morgan Gibbs-White's departure to Spurs, we have the Statman Danscape.
It's 4 against 4, and it's Gibbs-White. Nobody's closing him down, and it's Elanga in.
Yes!
Goal! Brilliant from Morgan Gibbs-White, and a fantastic finish from Anthony Elanga. Gibbs-White's got room to charge into. Through the Wolves half he goes, with Elanga to his right. Here is Elanga just inside the box. Back to
yes!
He's done it already! Gibbs-White scores!
Well, it definitely feels like that, Richard. I know that I'll come to my co-host first. It's shocking news. So everyone knows what's happened. We finished a pod earlier with Adam from Red Side of the Trent, and everything was good. I think it was jolly. And in that podcast, I even said, like, look, with Elanga going, it looks like Gibbs-White's here to stay, and that has bitten me on the arse bigger than you can ever imagine. But we know that he's your star boy, Richard. So, what's your reaction to Morgan Gibbs-White heading down to London, 15 minutes away from my front door for a medical?
Well, yeah, you've been through the ebb and flow of emotions, right? Just simply because he's, as you said, he's my favorite player since Stuart Pearce. He's such a polarizing figure in what we've been doing since we got to the Premier League, and I'm just trying to reconcile the fact that I got myself very much in a place of peace and tranquility with the idea that he was going to Man City, and it made a lot of sense, for his future prospects, both in terms of wage and in terms of getting to England more frequently. It kind of made a lot of sense given the history that they have recently. But then it's like then you drift now into this sort of false sense of security that it's not going to change. Now he's coming back, Elanga's probably going, or something to that effect, and so we keep one of the key pieces intact. The person we've been building around, and now you got to reconcile it immediately, like in a shotgun fashion, that he is not going to be here anymore. And now we've got a serious playmaker exiting the door, and now we've got to figure out how to manage that. And we barely scratched the surface in terms of transfer incomings ourselves. So, yeah, it's just a lot to reconcile in general. Personally, I hate it. I think it's an enormous loss for us. I thought it before even he was going to go to Man City, but I sort of came to peace with it, knowing that it helps the club a little bit. And this is part of what we do: succession and sustainability, right? And forward momentum, just knowing that these things are going to happen. We can't hold on to these players forever, i.e. someone tweeting or putting a post out there with X about what happened with Teddy Sheringham, right? Similar situation, but which was incredibly horrible and rude, by the way, whoever did that. But we'll digress on that. Ultimately, I recognize it's going to happen, and I think Dan, I don't want to steal Dan's thunder, but I just happened to notice a post that he put out a few hours ago, which is a picture of Nuno. In the end, we have the right recruiting team. We have the right support from our ownership. We have a lot of good veteran players with a lot of talent still on this club. And we have one of the best managers, I think, who can manage situations like this, keep everybody's, keep a cool head, and ensure that we find the right individuals to fill those roles who fit the culture, fit what we're trying to do as a club. And so we just got to trust in that in the end and just move forward. I don't want to be without Morgan Gibbs-White, but that's essentially where I'm at now.
So David Ornstein pops a tweet out that Spurs are interested in Danscape, and my initial reaction was, listen, that's not going to happen. We've just lost Elanga. The club are going to dig their heels in and stand firm on that. I'm pretty sure they're not going to want to see another one of the crown jewels depart. And it's moved really quickly. Mike McGrath, the Telegraph, isn't it? I think we were all jumping on his tweets quite quickly because he seemed to be ahead of the game. So he's come out and said something along the lines of, the clause is now active. And I popped in our group chat that made me think, the clause now being active, could the clause the clause has obviously always been there, but maybe it was a dormant clause. So therefore, it wasn't in play until, let's say, the end of the third year. So almost like part of the contract negotiations when he signed was, we'll put a £60 million clause in, but we're not going to let it be activated until you've given us 3 years of service. Because that feels about right. And I know that you've got thoughts on that as well, haven't you, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to when the news broke, I was kind of like, well, the only way we'll do a deal is if it's 80 million plus, something like that. Maybe we then do a deal on it. And you just think, well, Spurs probably aren't going to pay that. That's too much for them. They don't normally splash out that much. But then the speed with which it changed to, oh, by the way, there's a £60 million clause, and yep, they've ticked that box. It must have been a surprise to the club, I think, to some extent, that Spurs had that interest. But at the same time, if it is a 3 year, if it's something that's kicked in after 3 years, and basically Morgan's told the club, look, I'm not going to sign a new deal if this, if someone bids, I want to go, then it's going to happen quickly, isn't it? I suppose if someone ticks that clause, it's going to happen quickly. It's going to be a quick decision. And look, there's some cons to this deal. Like the fact it's Spurs is horrible. The fact it's Thomas Frank as manager who's going to get to manage Morgan Gibbs-White is really horrible. The price is horrible. I think it's slightly better that he's going to Spurs than Man City for him in terms of game time and what we might see from him. Maybe there's pros, but yeah, it's just been a pretty horrible bit of news. Even though, the only positive for us is the timing right now. We have got time to act. We have got time to react. It's been done quickly.
I said to Richard that had it been Man City, then I would have almost given a little pat on the bottom. Off you go with best wishes. Can understand you going to Man City. It's a no-brainer, but it does kick you in the gut a bit with Spurs. And on the Thomas Frank thing, this is a guy who's got the last laugh, because this is the guy that wanted to sign Brennan Johnson for Brentford and got turned down. And, we all laughed and ha, as if Brennan would go to Brentford. So now Thomas Frank is rocking up at Spurs, where he gets to manage Brennan Johnson, by the way, and Jed Spence also, by the way. And now he's fucking signed Morgan Gibbs-White out of bloody nowhere. And, it's almost like I can see that Danish horrible face of his, peering over as if to say, you. So, yeah, I'm feeling a little bit miffed off that Thomas Frank has got the last laugh on that. But as much as possible, still trying to keep feet on the floor. And we've all got our eyes on Twitter and all the other social media places. And there's a lot of meltdowning going on. But is this football? We talked about Alanga going, and I've just seen a picture of him stood in the Newcastle dressing room with his new teammates, by the way. And I felt like my heart had fallen out of my backside. So, yeah, it hurts a lot. But this is football, isn't it, Richard? We've said that we have to try to get our head around the fact that ultimately players move on. And I've said no one signs for Forest for life, and all that kind of stuff. And lo and behold, we're not just losing Anthony Alanga. We're losing Morgan Gibbs-White. I don't have the figures in front of me, but their combined goals and assists is going to be so difficult to replace, isn't it? So you have to hope, beyond hope, in amongst all this angst, that the club and the recruitment team, who are apparently, from what we've heard, are feeling quite relaxed about the transfer window. Maybe they're not feeling quite so relaxed at the moment, eh?
I wouldn't think so, because I agree with Dan. I think there's a bit of element of out of left field, sort of scenario with this. And so, yeah, I mean, they've got to have some obviously targets, because you're never going to be without some sort of contingency plan in place, because you probably had something already in place when you thought he was going to leave previously. So hopefully they're just deferring back to that, right? Like in the NFL draft terms, you always got a big board. You always got, this scenario and this scenario and this scenario, and you kind of run through those and wait for it to unfold. But yeah, I think to Dan's point, it is the rapid nature of it. But you bring up a great point. I mean, the goal contributing in action concept, right? I mean, Dan, you emphasize this when we're looking at players a lot, especially as you start to work through certain archetypes and certain type of traits. And those two guys are in the top. I think they're second and third on our. I think Alanga may have been first. Actually, I can't remember per 90, but they are at the top of the list of what we do. And so to take that away in literally less than a week, it is a bit overwhelming. And I think that's the part that starts to be hard to digest, because you just don't know where we're headed from that, because you have no inkling right? There's things thrown out there like McAtee. There's, we've all wanted, to sniff around and potentially go after someone like Harvey Elliott, where they have these players who have that versatility and they can shift between wide roles and sort of roles such as and be playmakers and be, effective on the attack. But and where are we going from here in terms of formation? Is this just one move towards something that might be a shift that Nuno wants to see and maybe was going to be a little bit more challenging with the presence of Gibbs-White? I don't know. But ultimately, yeah, that's the part I'm left with a little bit in wanting, is just where are we headed? But as you said, we got to trust what we have in place. I think we can weather the storm. I think the culture has enough stability to allow for that, and I think there's plenty of players in that dressing room that will be able to keep themselves, energized and ready to kind of move forward, even when you lose your captain on the pitch, right? But I think someone put it in the WhatsApp group too, which is a great shout. If you're going to find a silver lining, the fact is maybe now Nikola Milenkovic becomes your captain, which is always a good problem to have, when that guy suddenly, takes on the armband. But yeah, it's just hard wrapping my mind around how we replicate and how we fix the production. Because it's one thing to try to replace a skill set like Alanga's, which is almost impossible. It's another thing to have to replace just a comprehensive, holistic output that those two players gave us. That's the part I'm going, ooh, I don't know where that's coming from. There's certainly guys out there, but are we going to be able to get them? Is it we're going to get those over the line soon so they can get in for a preseason, they can get some match time with the club and under Nuno's system and move forward, in a positive way and be ready for the season.
Do us a favour, guys, if you are watching along and hit like and subscribe. There's over 100 of you checking us out at the moment, so please do like, subscribe, and join us on more Talking Reds episodes down the line. Please do pop your comments in as well. Let's get some reaction from the chat. John Sansom says, just remember that the club is bigger than any player. First and foremost, it's always been a team game. Well, yes, we echo that as well. Wake Up News is reminding us that Atletico Madrid want Murillo. He has been added to a 4-man shortlist, apparently. So the hits are going to keep on coming by the looks of things, guys. Let's say that Mason's talking and saying he's pretty scared.
That's my son, by the way.
Mason Spray.
Yeah.
He's pretty scared for the future of Forest, but he trusts in Nuno, knows what he's doing. So yeah, Mason, thanks for hopping on and giving us your thoughts as well. Gordon Mikalev, I beg your pardon, says he hasn't felt this bad since Greg Halford was used as a striker. Yeah, those were the heady days. And Edu's joined the club in the last few days, so this is a great start for Edu Danscape. I mean, Jeff wants Edu sacked. It says, sack Edu, while we still have a kind of starting 11. I'm firmly in the camp that, look, there's going to be targets that none of us know about. We all know about the Malik Fofanas. We all know about the Johan Bakayokos and so on and so on and so on. All these names that have been thrown around. But Edu's got work to do. Do you think, Danscape, that the club needs to come out and make some kind of statement? Or do you think that that's just unnecessary and let the journalists and the media do their spin? Does Mr. Marinakis need to come out and say, look, guys, this was unexpected. We didn't expect to lose Morgan after losing Anthony. The Anthony situation was a separate thing. It was its own story. And we were looking to move on in pre-season with Morgan, as our vice captain and so on. So this has kind of come out of nowhere. Do you expect and do you think he should do something like that?
I don't expect that, no.
Would it help?
Would it help? No, probably not. I just think the value is so low. I think everyone's upset with that. The fact it's 60 million. I don't think there's any good explanation for that. I think the explanation is that we are where we are in the food chain, unfortunately, and to get a player like Gibbs-White, we sort of had to compromise somewhere, and it's come about now. That's the only real explanation, which Mr. Marinakis will not like, because he wants us to be top of the food chain. But where we were and where we're going are two different things. So hopefully this won't happen again. Obviously, we've got some other players that we want to keep hold of and make sure they haven't got any silly clauses in. So hopefully that is the case with the likes of Anderson and Murillo, and we actually have full control over when we sell those guys. But I mean, Nuno's obviously going to be the guy who has to answer this question. And this is what's fascinating is, how much was this part of Nuno's plan? How much did he know about this? Is this something that, he was preparing for? Why weren't any, I suppose the other question is, why weren't any other clubs trying to exploit this release clause, potentially Man City and things like that? There are a lot of questions as to quite how you end up in this scenario. It's got nothing to do with Edu, who's obviously just come into the job and isn't even directly involved with Forest. But it puts a lot of pressure on him. from here on out, obviously to start, delivering some signings that ease the worry for people, and it puts some pressure on our performances early on in the season with whoever does come in, because obviously everyone now is going to be looking at things from a point of view of, well, if we kept these guys, we'd be doing this. And now it's a case of will the replacements come in and leave us as happy as we were last time with the signings of the likes of Anderson and Milenkovic. So there's just so many questions. That's the trouble. Come out.
And does it kind of sully the concept of moving to Europa too? Because now all of a sudden we're going to a more competitive situation potentially with less talent on the pitch at current state, right? I mean, that's the crazy part, is like you get all excited. I mean, I hate it for Palace, clearly. But, you get excited about the potential, what that means for us from a revenue standpoint, what that means from a cachet standpoint, as we're trying to bring players in still. That might move the needle for some people. It's just going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, because we went from like this concept, and I think someone brought it up in the chat, of absolutely needing depth in all ways, certainly in a winger space, somewhat in the midfield, somewhat in the fullback area, and now all of a sudden we've got less depth and potentially going to a more competitive league or tournament. It's just crazy how things change.
I mean, on the clause, going back to that, and the fact that we think obviously it's always been there, it must have been a clause that's been activated, because everything we all want. I'm trying to get my words out. We all wanted stuff to happen, but nothing was happening until the 1st of July. And it just goes to show that whilst the players whilst they're coming to the end of their contracts, nothing gets revealed, nothing gets talked about, and it's quite possible that release clause wasn't going to become available until after the 1st of July. So Man City might have been in for Gibbs-White or thought about it, but we're told by the club, well, if you want him, it's 80 million, and that's too rich for their blood. So because there's no release clause to talk about, and no age, and maybe the agent was under orders as part of the contract, you can't tell anyone about this release clause until after the 1st of July. So everything kind of happens after the 1st of July. The Ola Aina deal, the Nico deal, all those kind of things were announced after Nico, I think, was a little bit sort of just before that, but they're extensions, so it's a little bit different. So I'm even more sure now that I kind of think about it even more that release clause was a dormant thing that was only available since the 1st of July. Pat Brett in the comments says, I would have put money on Anderson ending up back in Newcastle. I think we'd all put money on that, Pat, to be honest with you. I mean, that's a surefire thing. He'd walk back to Newcastle. I understand that. He's still a Forest player. Richard and I were talking before we come on air that he's definitely going to be gone next season, next summer. Someone's going to come in for him. And the worst case scenario is that someone comes in for him next week. And all of a sudden, we are looking at assets being stripped. Well, you look at Bournemouth. They lost Dean Howson. They've lost the lad at the back, Kirkes. I was about to say Xerxes. And Kirkes. Zabani is either going or gone as well. I mean, that's 3 of their very good back 4. So it's a similar thing. They're not going to want to lose any of those players. We kept with the big. Yes, we did keep the big Willy Bolly. You
know what's funny? When I said to my partner, on just before, I was like, I need to do an emergency podcast because Forest is selling 2 players, and she went, "What? Not Willy Bolly though." That was her first response. As I know that. Only
she knows you too well. So look, it's happening, right? I mean, unless something late comes, which is not going to happen. So, Richard, Dan, James McAtee, Harvey Elliott. How do they kind of get your blood racing? I mean, if we were to bring in Harvey Elliott and James McAtee, it's a complete 180 on how I'm feeling now. As much as I know about football and I know players come and go and I'm accepting it, the poster behind me, the Gibbs-White one that I love having up, I've kept it up tonight because this is probably the last episode that I'll have him as a Forest player. But if he's replaced by James McAtee, Richard, and Harvey Elliott to start with, well, come on. That's got to be good, isn't it?
Based off of what you think they can achieve from a talent standpoint, a ceiling standpoint, I would say yes. Based off of what they've currently done, no. So it's just hard. It is definitely the right move. It's the right move in terms of the profile.
When he came in, he wasn't getting any. He'd been on loan at the Championship.
Right. I'm just talking about where we are right now, and do we have the luxury of being able to kind of
has played a lot of games for Liverpool? He's played a lot of first team games.
Oh no, you're right. I just think it, and I like the idea in terms of the concept of those two players because of the versatility of where they can play. Because the two holes now are attacking midfield and wing, and both of those players can do both of those things, as far as I'm aware, unless I'm completely obtuse to what they actually do. But and they've certainly Harvey Elliott has looked good in the Euros, under 21 Euros. So there's definitely talent there, and clearly they are pining for opportunities to get on the pitch and continue their own progression and in their own careers in that sense. So it makes sense, given that we have availability on those. If it's truly the right, if the price point is truly £20 million for McAtee, then that's a steal in my mind compared to what you saw, who he's being compared to, which was Cole Palmer, and what he went for. So the value add there is huge. The ROI is, I think, certainly there. Harvey Elliott looks to me like even more ready-made. To your point, Greg, he's logged more minutes at a young age on the pitch with Liverpool, and he's shown to be a very effective player. But similar to what Dan referenced in terms of where Morgan might have been if he'd gone to Man City, he may not be close to the top of the pecking order in that midfield area or in the attacking area of the pitch. So it's good that those things potentially could be a reality, and I would love for that kind of thing to happen because they are the right age, they are the right kind of profile of players, and they fit the positions that we're now deficient in.
What about you, Dan? What are you thinking when it comes to those two players and anyone else that springs to mind that we should be going after to replace those two that have left us?
It wouldn't be a bad position if England have just won the Euros and we end up with Anderson, McAtee, and Elliott from that team. If you're looking at potential and future sell-on value and developing and progressing, I mean, that is not a bad way to go to take potentially three of the best players in Europe and go from there. And depending on price, I mean, we signed Gibbs-White for 25 million plus something that rises up to 40 million-ish. So you are going to have to pay something like that for either of those two at least, probably more for Harvey Elliott, but it's not that different to what we had to pay and gamble on with Gibbs-White. We gambled that he was going to be the guy that he turned out to be. He would be the guy that would keep us up, and he's the guy that you could build a team around. So, it potentially means that we do have to gamble on those guys because of their age and because of their limited minutes. But it could work out very much a rinse and repeat process for us, as long as we don't put a £60 million release clause in, ideally. So, again, it comes down to the price you have to pay. It is about what we do next. It is entirely about what we do next. It's how much we have to pay to replace those guys. I'll be honest, I think probably top of my list as a replacement is probably Matthias Fernandes at Southampton. Like, I think he just looks like a proper... He reminds me of Elliot Anderson because he just looks so mature for someone who's so young, and he just comes on the pitch and he just looks like he knows what he's doing, but he is that little bit more of a number 10 sort of advanced player. So I would definitely have him up there as well. And obviously Southampton are presumably in a position where you could get a decent deal having been relegated. And there's other options out there. So
Buonanotte maybe?
Yeah, I mean, El Canous at Leicester as well is really proven that he can do it at this level. So it's less of a gamble because he's had a season where he's played regularly and he's delivered in a struggling team. So there are options out there. They're all a gamble. Everything's going to be a gamble from here, isn't it? That's why someone's paying 60 million and we'll go out and pay 20 or 30 million, is because we have to take the gamble. That's where we are in the food chain, unfortunately, for now. There's definitely options. I thought I'd feel worse about him going in from a footballing point of view. I feel bad because it's football now, isn't it?
The money,
money, but also the fact you never really get to see players stay at your club for long enough to fully progress to a point where, like you say, you'd have seen him in Europe potentially lifting a European trophy or an FA Cup. All those things are now right. That's it. You've got to start again with a new player like Elliot Anderson, who's after his first year. You fully get invested in him, but then where are you going to be in 2 years? It's not, it's not quite the same as it used to be when you had some of these players that you could see being at your club for a long time. So we are just going to have to rinse and repeat and look at it that way.
In the last couple of minutes, Spurs have confirmed a 6-year deal for Mohamed Kudus, who has been confirmed at £55 million. So they're splashing the cash. They've got the Champions League to look forward to, Richard. So is this really all part and parcel of us missing out on the final day? Is this what happens? Because I like to think that had we got into the Champions League like we all thought we were going to, that Alanga would be going nowhere and Gibbs-White would be going nowhere. We'd be building the team around them to continue. So it looks like this is a fallout from not getting Champions League football. Excuse me, one moment. Pat Brett in the comments says that David Moyes is targeting McAtee as his top transfer target. So a bit of competition there from Everton. Everton, nice new stadium, but really struggling in recent times. Kind of feel like Forest are a more attractive prospect than that. Tyler Dibling's another player, Richard, that's been mentioned. Is he someone you would like to see us go for?
From an ability standpoint, sure. From a cost standpoint, no. Look, it's all relative. It's all can be negotiated, right? As we've seen with the Elanga deal, because I think we all had, numbers in our heads, including Morgan Gibbs-White, in fact, that 80 million range, 70 million, for Elanga, but with add-ons and other things, it could get closer to that number. I would love a Tyler Dibbing. Again, it's all about the sort of profile of what we're looking for, but I just don't think he's going to be cheap. For whatever reason, at least what's been published is an outrageous number. But then you also saw like outrageous numbers for players like Richard Rios, and so forth. So it's just, I'm sure it's an option. I'm sure they'll kick the tires on it. I think it was being bandied about on X that he was an interest for Forest, but I don't know if that's really going to come to fruition. I think the McAtee thing potentially seems more realistic, but I loved him as a player. I think he's got a lot of potential, but I don't know if that's a reality just based off the fact that they're publishing the idea. It's like £50 million release clause. I think you're muted, buddy.
Mute.
That's what happens when you cough and you need to put yourself on mute. Apologies for that. Danscape, what about Elliot Anderson in the 10 role? It's something we spoke about last season. And is it now a possibility that could be what we see with Elliot Anderson moving into that role? What do you reckon? Are you not sold in it?
No, he can do that job. I think he showed a bit of that. Obviously, in that Palace game being one where he did it. He did it in a different way to Gibbs-White. He drifted out into wide areas and put balls into the box. A bit more De Bruyne-like is what he reminded me of than the kind of all-action Gibbs-White approach. But he can definitely step up and do it. Obviously, I'm wondering whether we might completely change our style and not necessarily have a number 10 that everything goes through, which is one way to deal with this problem. Rather than going out and trying to find the next Gibbs-White specifically, maybe you try and make your life a little bit easier in changing formation, build a team around more than just that one player that everything pretty much went through for Forest for the last 3 seasons. So, if you end up with a different formation and a different tactic, then you come up with different players on your list. And this is where it's interesting. This is where, how much did Nuno plan for this? Did he know about this? Has he always had a plan for what happens if Gibbs-White goes? And, is it that we change formation, or is it just a case of he's just shocked us and he's just sat there thinking, right, I had a plan for this season and now it's all ripped up before we've even really got on the training pitch. So yeah, another side of the kind of questions and things that come out of it. But Elliot Anderson's definitely capable. If you replace him, I suppose the question is, how do you replace him in the middle if he does go into the 10, isn't it?
I think we spoke before when it looked like Gibbs-White might go to City before the Club World Cup. We spoke about coming to terms with that and tried to talk ourselves into the positive side of things, which was, well, look, we don't have to necessarily build our team around a 10. And Nuno's always favoured a 4-3-3. So maybe we'll see us move into that kind of formation. And I definitely think that we need to evolve in terms of style. If we're going to go out and try and do what we did last season, it isn't going to happen because there are so many metrics that we achieved on that I just don't see necessarily as being as successful with. The Woods goal scoring XG, for example. I mean, his XG was like the best or one of the best in Europe against the chances that he had and the goals that he scored. If he can repeat that again, great. But we were that low possession team and we had that certain style. And I think we need to evolve away from that. I think we need to try and move into a different style of football, Richard. So maybe it is time for us to employ that 4-3-3. We've signed Igor Jesus. That was the big news that happened last week. Hallelujah. Blessed be his name. And we're hoping that Jer Cunha is going to be not far behind, another exciting centre-back. but none of us expected to have to, as we've said already, go out and replace two of the jewels in the crown, and they are the jewels in the crown when it comes to flair, when it comes to goals. So the depth that we need and the replacements that we need for Gibbs-White and for Elanga now kind of put you on the spot here. How many signings do you really think we're going to have through the door? Is this going to be similar almost now to season 1? I'm not expecting 25 people in, but we could be looking at 10 to 15, can we?
I still think that's pretty aggressive. I would say it's probably 4 or 5 more. I in my mind, I think about it in terms of, like I said, if you get players, what's the one constant that we know about Nuno? There's a certain profile of player in terms of their personality and how they're going to fit that environment, because he's got a way of managing that dressing room that he's going to want to retain. Gibbs-White isn't the same personality as Ina, but it meshed, it worked. He was humble enough to be taught. He was humble enough to be developed. But fiery enough on the pitch that he could command others around him to play better. But he was a great addition into that room. I think he still maintains that sort of perspective. I don't know if there's a lot of, managers out there who wouldn't want that kind of thing, but I also think it's about that versatility quotient. It's like, okay, what is he looking for in terms of what they can do? And everything that we've seen, whether it be favoring, certain types of players, it was based off the fact that they had the ability to be kind of mixed and matched and moved around a bit. And so I'm hoping that that's the way that we sort of solve some of that need or that propensity to want to try to throw more bodies at the problem. I recognize that, hopefully with Europa, the one good thing about that, as we've all talked about, is it limits the amount of matches you're going to have to play just to get into the tournament, which is a good thing. And so you kind of save a little bit of, for lack of a better word, used up tread on the tires. But you definitely have the opportunity, I think, to reassess maybe some of your plan, but not get completely departed from what you may have already had in motion, like Dan's referenced and we've talked about. So I would say that, I'm looking more in that sort of 5, max 6 sort of range. I think that's probably about at the most what I would see him do, because I just think it's a lot to try to integrate in such a short span of time. And I recognize,
6?
Yes.
That's quite low, I think. In terms
what
of
was the original number at the beginning of the season? Was it that departed from that?
I always thought we were signing 10 players this window from the start.
Based off of, Dan, because of the. Yeah, no, I get it. Go ahead.
Go on. I think we got a bit of delay going on. Sorry. We've lost Sosa as well. I know that he didn't get a lot of game time, but he was a squad player. We've lost Elanga. We've lost Gibbs-White. So there's 3 that need to be filled to bring us back to where we were. We've got Europa League football now on top as well. I'm expecting, if we don't sign 10 players, I'll be really surprised.
Well,
I'll be really surprised.
I was just thinking in terms of what the original list was being thrown out there, right? You were looking at least 2 wingers. That was the case. Maybe 1 midfielder, fullback, preferably left-footed left back, right, Dan? Potentially a backup goalkeeper, and then you had a striker. So that's about 6, isn't it? So that's why I'm like, I don't think the plan completely changes significantly. I just think you might, maybe it does. I don't know. Maybe you do add a couple more to that number. But in my mind, based off of what Dan has brought up too, when Nuno was in Europe previously, I don't think he departed to an enormously large squad. That he didn't suddenly shift to that approach. I think he kept it thin. Clearly, when we're trying to be competitive in the Premier League, we saw what happened last season when we didn't have the same kind of depth or Plan B sort of concept. But I don't think that it felt like the number was always the number. So maybe you ratchet that up by 7 or 8. But I don't see him going past that. I don't know how we would do that or why we would do that. Do we have the funds to do that?
Toffolo's gone as well. That's 4. 4 have gone.
Yeah,
from
I think that's it. I think it's one of those when you actually put in the outgoings and potential outgoings, like for example, if Morato or Carmo go, and what do you do with Miguel? You lost Moreno left back, Toffolo left back. Potentially when you factor you're not necessarily adding that many players to what we had, but you are.
I'm not saying that we're going to sign 10 starters.
Yeah,
no, I think we're going to sign 10 players. We need 10. Moreno, Toffolo, Gibbs-White, Elanga. And someone else that I've just mentioned I've forgotten about already.
Sosa.
Sosa. That's
Yeah.
exactly. He was so memorable. That's 5 at the door. You know what I mean? So you got to buy 5 to replace them, and then you got to think about adding the quality to cover the extra cover. And so I'm surprised. I'd be surprised if we don't sign 10 players. Just interrupting myself. I don't know. I haven't had a chance to kind of look at this properly because this someone just sent me a link to something. But an online magazine, Giuseppe Labalate, sounds Italian. He's saying he can exclusively confirm that Forest aren't feeling too good about the move of Gibbs-White on his way to Spurs. The report is that says that Gibbs-White's medical is scheduled to take place tomorrow, as we know. They are saying that Forest see it as a real blow. They are frustrated by how things have panned out over Gibbs-White move because he was to be their focal point next season. I am told Forest are frustrated with how this has played out. They never denied a clause, but they never confirmed it. Forest lost to Langer, but they thought that was a good deal. They're saying that this one frustrates them as they were really planning him to be the focal point of their next side next season. The players' agents have been talking to other clubs, and Spurs made their move. And Spurs have a very close relationship, apparently, with Gibbs-White's agents, and this clearly helped the deal get done. They made their move. They made their move, and it was quick. So, look, I've kind of like bumbled my way through that. But if that's true and genuine, then it doesn't surprise me that the club do see this as a blow and unexpected. They wouldn't have wanted to lose Gibbs-White. But as we said earlier, if you've got an agent doing the whispering into the ears of others, then that's what happens in football. Agents make moves happen. He's obviously going to get a nice bit of commission and all that kind of stuff. That's how that works. But just kind of going back to the signings then, I mean, look, it could be a pick 'em. It could be that we're all wrong and you know, they signed just like 3 players, but that's unlikely. You know, we just got to kind of try and do the math. There's 25 squad places, and whilst Nuno wants to work with a smaller amount, we've got another competition that we now are in, and it's a better competition than the one we thought as well. That's not to say that we were going to sign worse players, but do you think, Richard and Dan, that you know is going to make a difference? Steve Battlematch has joined us as well, hot off the trip back from Wales. So welcome, Steve. Nice to have you with us. So yeah, I was just saying to the guys, do we think that? And I'll come to you on your main reaction in just a moment, Steve. But I was asking Richard and Dan, do we think that now Forest will be in with a better chance of getting better players if it is Europa League? I'll come to you, Richard, on that first.
I do think that makes a difference. I do think that there's a bit more cachet that accompanies that, and certainly that in our minds, in terms of the kinds of revenue that we potentially could generate from that. Because I think, Dan, you talked about the £20 million potentially that you might gain in shifting from Conference League to that.
Like
maybe I misread that.
And stuff goes up.
Right. Yeah. So you've got kind of those kinds of things, and then coupled with the fact that you are playing a high caliber of a team. I mean, in terms of the competition that you're going to face, so there's a little bit more. It's a little bit more illustrious, right, for us to be in a competition such as that. You know, and if we win something like that, if we do what Spurs did last season, then that puts us in an automatic qualifier for Champions League. So I could see that being a factor, you know, and there's just a little bit, I mean, potentially there could just be more cash to spend now. I mean, I don't know. We'd have to plug it into Raf's, spreadsheet just to get a sense of, and a higher wage and a higher, meeting some of the release clauses, maybe not having to, well, you still want to negotiate on that side. And like Dan said, that's always amortized anyway. But I think on the wage side of it, maybe you now get a bit more competitive by selling him with some of these players, because if you're going to pull him away from a club like Liverpool, even though Harvey Elliott's not starting, and the allure is being able to have more minutes, being able to get a higher profile, you can certainly offer him that. And I think that only continues for potentially him looking at, progression towards the senior England squad, just like Anderson wants to do, because clearly that would benefited him coming to us because he got that exposure. So hopefully that is something coupled with the Champions League, Europa potential. If you win that, going to Champions League, coupled with, the opportunity to increase your profile by having more minutes, I'm sure that definitely factors in.
Steve, good to have you with us. Thanks for hopping on. Just wanted to get your reaction to the news that Morgan Gibbs-White is heading to Spurs. How are you feeling, Steve?
Well, pretty good, to be honest, as I'm sure every Forest fan is. He was such a great player to watch. I thought he was he rallied the crowd a lot. He could pull a game out of nothing in terms of an assist or, a goal. Probably should have scored more goals, to be honest. But, football's such a mad thing, isn't it? I mean, I've been in Wales today and playing golf, and I went on the golf course this morning, and Morgan Gibbs-White was a Forest player, and I came off and, he'd gone. And it's bonkers, isn't it? And I don't know if I've seen the rumours about Europa League, but we haven't had that confirmed, have we? So
it's not confirmed. I mean, the press are talking about it like it is going to happen, but until it happens, it's we're still in the conference, so we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get carried away on that because I think that Palace will probably appeal to whatever they can appeal to, but whether they'll have enough time for an appeal before the competitions will start, I don't know. But I'm still in my head working on the basis that we're in the Conference League. But you're right. If that decision does go for us, that gives us a bit more pulling power, gives us a bit more money. I mean, the worry is that people will see the team from last year broken up. Alanga gone, Morgan Gibbs-White gone. If then a massive offer comes in from Murillo, would he go as well? I don't think the club will want to do that, but money talks, and it's very difficult, I think, to stop, particularly if a player's head's turned. And if it's true that Gibbs-White had a release clause of 60 million, then once that becomes known, then someone's going to pay that, aren't they? And Tottenham are clearly going to buy three sides at this rate, aren't they? And Brennan Johnson gets them in the Champions League with a fluky goal, and next minute they're buying half the Premier League. So it's a cruel game, but we were never going to replicate last season, were we? Last season was a bit of a one-off. If you look at the history of Forest, the best season we've had for 30 years, and at that first season back in the Premier League where we did so well, Collymore went at the end of that season. And I was equally as gutted when Collymore went to Liverpool, thinking, well, why didn't you stay? We're in Europe now. Just give us another year. But people move on, and we support the club. We don't support the individuals. I mean, that's why I always was reluctant to get names on the back of my shirt, because people come and go. But I have got Gibbs-White on the back of a shirt somewhere.
Oh dear! I had Bohinen back in the day. That was the last time I think I had one when he left.
But they break your heart in the end because they do move on. It's very, very rare that a player who's not homegrown will go to a club and stay at a club for the majority of his career. It just doesn't happen. No. Can't think of it ever really happening, to be honest with you. A player that's not homegrown that goes somewhere for a really long period of time. It just doesn't happen these days. We are a stepping stone club for many players. And if we see it that way, and we accept that, and we work with that, and use it to our advantage, I think, as Richard or Dan said earlier, if the Gibbs-White model isn't a good example for any player out there that says, look, you can come to Forest, you can spend 2 or 3 years, you can come in as a young 20-year-old, you can develop, you can be adored by a fan base that will have your back through thick and thin. If you put everything into the shirt and on the pitch, then the fan base will adore you. And, when it comes time for you to depart and move on to bigger and better things, then as long as the deal's right for the club, then no problem and everyone's happy. So I think that's really how Forest have to operate. Players' agents will always be talking to other clubs. And it may well be the fact, as someone said earlier, I think it was Gordon, he says he was at Edwalton Golf Club, admitting he's leaving anyway. It's not new news. Well, for us non-members of Edwalton Golf Club, I'm afraid it is, Gordon, to be fair. It might well be that, locals knew this or didn't know that or whatever. But ultimately, like Pat says in the comments, he says, I'm personally very disheartened. It's easy to become disheartened. But ultimately, we have to look forwards. I'm excited about who might be coming in, because
it's also just on that topic. Yeah. It's also easy to sort of try and, I suppose, slander Morgan Gibbs-White a bit as well, because I've seen that online.
You put your barriers up. It's easier to kind of deal with the pain a bit. Oh, he wasn't that good anyway.
Well, but also to say that it's, that he's been a bit dishonest or not genuine when he was saying, he was happy here and he'd rather play here than anywhere else and all that stuff. And and then he turned those comments around as if he was then going to stay forever. And I just think, well, what's he supposed to say? He can't come onto the Forest social media channels and say, yeah, I'm happy here for now, but as soon as someone comes in, I'll be off. He can't say those things. He can't win, basically. Once you're a player in this position, some people will see it and think, well, he was never committed or he should stay. And I think the Elanga move might have, really pushed his mind into this position. If he's seeing his colleague and his peer, similar age, similar level of player, suddenly go to Newcastle, probably triple his wages. He's playing in the Champions League. It might be that Gibbs-White kind of got to a point where he thought, well, I'm going to be annoyed if I stay now because I want a piece of that action. I don't want to watch Anthony Elanga go and do that. So he might have pushed the move with his agent a bit to say, look, I actually do want to move, and and people will hate that, but I think that's just the reality of it. Like, we'd all probably do it in our jobs if someone came along and offered you the chance to step up and the pay rise and all that. Yeah. So I would urge people to avoid blaming him for the situation. I think it's just inevitable.
You got to be happy for the 3 years that we've had with him and the 2 years with Elanga too. It's the lure of the Champions League, isn't it? And we missed out on the Champions League by, in effect, one goal. One more goal against Leicester, and we'd be in the Champions League ourselves. And I dare say, at least one of them two, maybe both, would still be at the club because they'd be playing in the Champions League at the City Ground. But it's very hard to compete with Tottenham and Newcastle with stadiums that hold 60-odd thousand, with wages that will be double what we're paying probably. It's about now how we rally as a club, who we get in, and who are the leaders in the squad that remain. Milenkovic stepping up, maybe as captain. Ola's staying, Nico Williams is staying, maybe Callum stays. Maybe we get a core 3 or 4 really exciting new players in. Next season is going to be completely different, and we can't compare it to last. And we will be, we'll read those Instagram mournful statements from Morgan Gibbs-White and Anthony Elanga telling us what a great time they had at the club and wishing us well. But then we've got to kind of delete that and move on to the next players that come in and see what the next season brings, because, in 3 months' time, they'll be in a different shirt trying to score against us.
This is it. Ultimately, players move on. We've said it many, many times, and you can't really knock them for that. But as long as they give everything whilst they're ours, that's all we can expect. But when it's time for them in their minds to move on, then they move on. I'm going to wrap things up, guys. But what I would also mention, and I don't know, again, you don't know what's factual and what's just someone putting it out there. But there's an account on X called Liverpool News. You've got 182,500 followers. It does look like it's just someone he says he's a Liverpool season ticket holder. But that account is stating that Forest have contacted the camp of Harvey Elliott to present their project. Now, whether or not that's true or not, who knows? I hope it is, because he's a player I really would love to see. And I said that during the Euros for the under-21s. I'd love to have him at Forest. Let's wrap things up, guys. We wanted to come on and give you our reaction. Thank you so much for watching along. Do us a favour, hit like on this video, please. If you haven't already, please do subscribe as well. We're going to be back with another episode on the weekend when the architect joins us. But just quickly to finish off, hopefully Callum Hudson-Odoi now he's been given the number 7 shirt. That hopefully signifies that he's looking to sign a new deal. We've signed extensions with Olam, as Steve says, and Nico Williams. Nuno signed one recently as well. Murillo only put pen to paper on a no extension middle of last season. So the Atletico Madrid interest might be there, but you'd have to hope and expect that Forest will stand firm and say, I think he's got 5 years on his contract still now or something like that, whatever it is. But you just never know. So, anything that happens, we'll come on and we'll react to it. But we want to try and be positive. The kit has been released. The shirt's been released. And I've been done for 136 quid already. In amongst feeling shit, I still gave them my money But there we go. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. It's been brilliant to hear everything you guys have got to say. So thank you, Dan.
Can I add one positive? Can I have one last positive take?
Go on, Dan.
You touched on it there. Our strength last season was the defence, and we've kept that intact. Our attack was actually a lower half of the table attack. So we're keeping the key of what was successful last season together, regardless of what else happens, which is not completely easy, but it is a little bit of a positive, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Anything else positive from you, Steve? We could do with it. We could do with it. How was Wales? How was the drive back?
Over the next 2 or 3 days, we'll probably find out what European competition we're in, and I think that we can put that one to bed then and just concentrate on whichever one it is. Let's not get disappointed if it's still the Conference League, because it's still Europe. And I'll be writing an emergency blog tomorrow morning to try and sum all this up, because you got to get it out, haven't you? But don't turn it into abuse against players and all that.
Absolutely. And Richard Spray, my compadre, anything you want to add before we go, mate?
When
cuddle?
That might be expensive for me to get that cuddle. I have to travel quite a ways.
I'll save it for October when you land.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, it's funny. It's one of these moments that just come to my mind randomly that, oftentimes when you grow up, you just hate the things that your parents tell you over and over and over again, and you're convinced that it's complete bunk. And then I suddenly realized when my mom would say bless and release all the time, as a way of just kind of letting go of that, which is not really that critical to your life, as much as we probably think that about anything that goes on with Forest. But bless and release, to your point, Dan, don't start drifting towards the ultra negative side of the equation, which is to get nasty and get a little bit hypercritical, because he's been brilliant for us, and he's given everything to the cause. And I always appreciate that about him. That's how Stuart Pearce played, and that's what I loved about it. His heart was on his sleeve at all times. I will say this too: we have one of the best managers in the Premier League. We're still in the Premier League. We still have a great owner. We have a great, ground that's being redeveloped to stay in the Premier League. And we have a culture, and we have a, that's rock solid. And we have, the best fan base in the world that can weather this, because we've weathered worse than losing Morgan Gibbs-White. Let me tell you, we're all aware of that, right? Acutely. So, and everyone who's listening is acutely aware of that. So I'm very positive, actually. The introduction, the inclusion of Dan and Steve into this conversation, not that Greg was like, the grumpy Smurf in the room, but he was definitely plenty
Papa
positive
Smurf.
before he came on. Yeah, that's right. Papa Smurf, excuse me. Yeah. So I'm super excited about what the recruitment team's going to do. And I think it'll be really interesting to see, because, a few months down the road, we're probably going to be like, wow, we were really putting way too much stock in that moment. Right. And we just need to move on and enjoy what we've got in front of us.
Okay. Thank you very much, Richard. I'll part you with these thoughts that I had to tell my 8-year-old son, Orlando, earlier on as he arrived home from school about Morgan Gibbs-White and Spurs. I had to explain to him what a release clause was. He didn't really get it at first. He does now. But all I got out of him really was a little bit of crying, a little bit of anger, a little bit of frustration. Why can't he stay at Forest? And why is he going to Spurs? So, why is he going to Spurs? Why is he going to Spurs? They finished 17th last season, all that kind of stuff. So, the pain is real, from the little ones all the way up to the ones that, going back to the 60s and 50s and so on. Good players come and we love them, but that when they depart, we have to remember that it was great to have them while they were here and what they did for us. We're looking forward to next season. We're back in Europe. Milenkovic, Aina, Nico Williams, Chris Wood, Elliot Anderson. We've got some great players at the club, and there's more to come, I'm sure. We'll see you soon.
Come join Greg and Richard right here on Dark and Red.